Thanks for joining us here today for this webinar. Just a bit about me. So I write children's fantasy, so middle grade fantasy, and young adult thrillers. So a mix, I would say. In my day job, I'm a lawyer, so very intensive, which is partly why I developed the system of writing 10,000 words in a day, just because I don't get a lot of time during the week. And with that, I will actually dive in and just get cracking on the webinar. So Anna, if you could let me share the screen. Oh, there we go. There we go. And off we go. So I will start the session with a disclaimer, which is that fast drafting doesn't work for every book or for everyone. So I find things like fantasy, a lot of the time I need to spend more just thinking about the plot and the world building, and things can get quite complex. So often fast drafting doesn't always work in that situation. And some people prefer writing in sort of shorter bursts during the week if they've got time, little pockets here and there. It's quite intensive. People might like spending more time over, say, 3 or 4 months, just really developing and getting to know the characters. So I will start off with that disclaimer. But this is how I prefer to draft my books. So the main focus of this session is how I actually write 10,000 words in a day. I think that's the interesting bit, but to be able to do that, I will have to talk about how I actually plan as well, so how I plot a novel, just because planning is so important with this. So you can pants to an extent, so you can sort of come up with things on the fly, but I think for this method to work, you need to have a sense of what you're doing and where the story is going to go, just because you're getting so much down on the page so quickly that you don't want to waste time thinking about, oh no, what's going to happen, 3 scenes down. And I will actually say, I don't plan it in a massive amount of detail either. So I don't do sort of pages and pages of notes. And I don't really do huge character backstories, anything like that, because I like learning about my characters sort of draft by draft, and they develop as I go. But I do like having just that initial plan in the first place. So to be able to fast draft, you do need to have some enthusiasm for what you're writing. You are writing a lot very, very quickly. There is no time to stop and think, oh no, I'm not enjoying this. You just need to keep going. And another important thing about fast drafting is keeping on top of your goals. This means during the day, when you're actually doing your 10,000 words, knowing where you should be in terms of word count and where you actually are. So you're not sort of writing until midnight thinking, oh no, I still haven't got my words down. And I think it goes without saying, you do need to have a big block of time to write. No one is going to be writing 10,000 words in an hour in a pocket here and there. So having that big block of time to write is important, which is why I know this method won't work for everyone. But yeah, so you need to have that big block. And you need to have the ability to turn off your inner editor. There is no time to sit there and think, oh no, what I'm writing is not very good. My first drafts, a lot of the time, are just characters having conversations in an empty room. White room, nothing there in the background, nothing described. A lot of the time, I don't even know what the characters look like. A lot of the time, I just have dialogue tags, just character said X, character said, character X said this, character Y said that. They are not good, but that is the point of fast drafting, is that you have something down on the page that you can edit, because I really subscribe to the idea you cannot edit nothing. You cannot edit a blank page. And a lot of the time, I think that is what stops so many people from progressing. It's just the fact they never get that first draft down, because I think a lot of the work will come in edits. So definitely the important thing is, don't worry if it's not great. This first draft is just for you. And then, so planning. the important thing is about this method is that you know what you're going to write. So how do I plan? I like planning in small chunks and building outwards. So the idea of planning an entire book, for me, it's really daunting just because there's so much that goes into a book. There's so much plot. There are so many chapters. There are so many sort of subplots and threads to think about. And that overwhelms me, which is why I start very, very small and build outwards. So I start with a paragraph pitch, sometimes just the concept, sometimes just literally a sentence. Spider-Man is bitten by a radioactive spider and must defeat a villain, something really basic. And my one paragraph pitch, actually, a lot of the time, it could become a query letter. And I know a lot of writers don't enjoy writing query letters, but I like to write the query letter before I've even written the book. I think the issue there is that you've got this 80,000 word book that you then need to condense into 250 words, and you need to figure out where the important points are, which is what makes writing a query letter so difficult. But you could just start with the query letter from the very beginning as part of your planning, because that will also ensure that you've actually got a pitchable concept there as well. So, it's going to have stakes. So if I just take you through, what a query letter would include and what your sort of one paragraph pitch would include, it's going to be the same thing. So query letters in paragraph 1, they would start with who the character is at the beginning of the book. You've got a sort of 12-year-old hero and they don't have many friends and life's a bit boring for them. And then an inciting incident happens. If I carry on with the Spider-Man thing, just because that is now on my mind, Peter Parker is bitten by a radioactive spider and boom, he's a superhero. That's your inciting incident. So that's how your paragraph 1 of your query letter would end. And then paragraph 2, well, how do they react to the inciting incident? What do they do with that newfound power? Does Peter Parker, go on a wild stealing spree, for example? Is he actually a villain? Or does he, decide he's going to fight crime? And then paragraph 3 would be the stakes. So I've actually written a book in the past where I got to the end and I didn't know what the stakes were. And I only figured out the stakes when I wrote the query letter. And I was like, oh no, that should have been in the book. I've got something in my query letter, which isn't in my book. So again, starting from the very beginning, knowing what your stakes are going to be, I think that's so, so helpful. So, Peter needs to choose between X and Y. And I like to have one of those choices linking back to who he is at the beginning of the query letter there. So if you start paragraph 1 by saying Peter doesn't have many friends, or okay, in paragraph 3, one of his choices will be he needs to save the world or steal this really exciting car, and finally he'll have friends, and that will be his choice. So that will give you a general sense as well of how the character is going to change over the course of your book. So you're also starting to think about character arc and knowing that your character is going to, grow, which is obviously really important as well, because plot and character are so interlinked. So you've started with that one paragraph pitch and you've sort of just built out into 3 paragraphs, and you've got sort of all the most important points there. And also that will be really helpful afterwards when you actually start querying, if you want to query your book. So after that one paragraph pitch, I would turn it into the 3 paragraph query letter, and you just add in a bit more details here and there. And you've essentially got your 1-page synopsis. So you've got your outline. So again, this is something loads of writers really struggle with, is coming up with a synopsis. How do you condense everything in your book into 1 page? Again, just do it from the very beginning. Have your outline there. So obviously this might change as you're drafting and you learn new things. But again, just starting with it from the beginning, you know where all the characters are going to end up, you've got a plot. So again, I find that really helpful to do. And then I like to use beat sheets. So one of the most popular ones is Save the Cat, but there are loads out there. And you can pretty much just, Google beat sheets for plots and loads will come up for you. So they're really easy to find. They're really good free resources out there as well. So this is just generally an example of something you might find on a typical beat sheet that I would use. So again, you would have your opening scene. What does the character want at the beginning? Their motivations should be clear, even if some are hidden. So for example, you open up and you've got this character wanting to break into a bank. I don't know why all my characters are criminals for some reason. That's what I'm coming up with. Maybe because I mentioned I am a lawyer. But so you've got character A, they want to break into a bank. And they really want to steal this diamond necklace because they have to pay character Y. So they've got a motivation, and the reader will get a sense, okay, if they don't manage to do this thing, then they'll be in a lot of trouble. So you've already got an idea of who the character is, why you should care about them. And I think that's really important as well. Something I struggle with quite a lot is having that initial connection to the characters. So, what do they want? Because you're opening with a character. So the reader needs to care about that character to want to keep on reading. They don't know anything about the plot. They don't know where the plot's going to go. All they know is character A is right in front of them. Why do they care about them? And of course, you can introduce some like hidden motivations later. They're stealing from the bank to, reclaim this diamond necklace because they're in debt to person Y. And if they don't repay this debt, then the whole city is going to explode. So even if something's hidden later on, you have that initial motivation there. And then your inciting incident, what kicks off the plot? What is the big turning point in your life that takes the character from sort of their day-to-day ordinary life of robbing banks up to the next level? And then after the inciting incident, the protagonist starts reacting to things. Their life has now changed. And then beyond that, you've got your first plot point, and that is where your antagonist normally comes in. So they're not able to just go around their lives minding their business. There is a villain, and the villain doesn't always need to be a person. It can be a circumstance, but there needs to be some sort of tension there. And then after that first plot point, you've got a pinch point, and some beat sheets don't include this, some do. The idea is to just make sure that things keep going wrong for your character. So ideally what you want across your book is rising tension. It starts slightly here and then it keeps rising and rising and rising until the climax. So just planning in that pinch point, make sure that things are still going wrong and the story is still going somewhere. And next up, midpoint. I swear by the midpoint. I do enjoy a good midpoint. I tend to find that I enjoy writing the first half of the book more than I enjoy the second half of the book. So for me, the midpoint is actually the point where I start panicking a bit in the second half because I don't really know what I'm doing. But it's really fun to write. That is where we introduce brand new information. And ideally, the protagonist goes from reacting to everything around them to actually being really active. We love an active character who's actually driving the plot, making things happen. For me, I don't want to be able to pull out my character and the plot just continues on without them, because it's like, what's the point of this character here? You want the main character to be just in there in the nitty-gritty. The story is about them. They are the one forcing the story onwards. So that is your midpoint. And then after that, second pinch point, again, I think a lot of books, I think especially the first draft for me, the draft sort of starts to meander. I don't really know where I'm going. It sort of starts rushing because I just want to be finished with it. So again, just plotting in that second pinch point, more things are going wrong, more bad things are happening. At least I've got some sort of structure there, some sort of roadmap that I'm following. And then we have here the second plot point, the oh my goodness moment. There is one final bit of new information that is now going to help me with the climax. This is the reason the climax didn't happen, after the first plot point. There is a reason the climax is happening at the end of the book. And this one crucial bit of information is the thing that helps your character, be prepared for that climax, that big moment. So at the climax, no more information introduced. And I I do enjoy that rule. I know some people like breaking rules. This is one that I do enjoy, just because making sure there is no more information there. Make sure you don't have a Deus Ex Machina. I can never say that word. I'm sorry. You can see it on the screen there. Yeah. So like, if your character has powers that they've never used before, well, they could have been struggling with those powers over the course of the book, and finally, at that second plot point, they've had the OMG moment. Oh, I can finally use my powers now. The climax might be the first time they use those like brilliant powers, but it's not coming out of nowhere. They don't suddenly discover they can fly, at 90% of your book. I think as a reader, I'm not sure about everyone else, but I don't like being surprised in that way. I like feeling like I've gone on the journey with the character. And I like knowing, okay, this is how they've developed and they've progressed, and these are the powers they've learned, and it all makes sense at the end. And at the climax, obviously, everything all comes together, all your like little plot threads on all your sort of subplots and things all wrap up into this lovely big explosion at the end. I'm talking about the climax like I love it, but that's actually one of the parts I really hate. I hate drafting. My critique partner can attest to this. I just rush through the climax typically, because I just want to be at the end, and I come back later and just really think it through and settle down and go, didn't take my time over it. But yeah, the climax ultimately ends up being really fun to read. And then after the climax, wrapping things up, tying up your loose plot threads, and how's the character changed at the end of the book versus how are they at the beginning. They should hopefully be different. They should hopefully have gone on a journey, and there should have hopefully been rising tension over the course of the book. So again, knowing what you're going to write, you've now got a one-page outline. You've now got your beat sheets, and you should be able to take all of that and turn it into a chapter by chapter outline. And again, these don't need to be details. I literally write a sentence per chapter. And honestly, planning my plots normally take me, a few weeks, maybe a week or two, just because I like thinking about what I'm going to do before I write it. But it doesn't need to be great detail. You don't need to have sort of planned, on page like 102, this character is suddenly going to appear and say this thing. It doesn't need to be in that sort of level of detail. So you can sort of still leave some things to discover as you're writing, because I think it's fun to discover things as well, because I think that's fun as well. You get to be creative as you're going and the words are flowing, and oh wow, I wasn't expecting this to happen, but it has. So I like giving myself a bit of leeway as well, which is why I would say I'm a mixture of sort of plotting and pantsing. I do like having those sort of off the cuff moments, but to be able to write your 10K, I think you need to have sort of this vague sense of your story. So far I've been mainly focused on plot, but obviously the characters are important as well. They are the people who populate your book. And like I said, on page 1, paragraph 1, sentence 1, the reader doesn't know where your plot is going, and it could be the most miraculous plot in the world, but they don't know that. All they know is character A on page 1, and they care about character A. And I struggle a bit with characters as well. My first drafts, like I said, my first drafts are very much character A said this, character Y said that, just getting the plot down and not really thinking too much about sort of who the characters are as people. And I tend to learn about my characters more with each draft, sort of unraveling and really thinking about how would this particular character be reacting to the situation, what's their particular character traits, how are they different from someone else. But I like to do character profiles, and again, this is something my critique partner told me about, and she always makes me do it every single time, and I hate it every single time, and I will whine about it, but I will sit down and do them. Often they're only a page. Again, really short. I don't go into too much detail. Some people might prefer to write longer character profiles and go, say, 20 pages and really sit and think about sort of who the characters are, when's their birthday, what's their favourite childhood meal, their favourite childhood memory. I don't go into that sort of level of detail. Like I said, I discover my characters as I'm drafting. But I think it's important just to have a basic sense of the characters before you start plotting, because obviously they are super important to the plot as well. Hopefully they're the ones who are driving the plot. So these are things I include in my character profiles. So their physical description, what do they look like? Like I said, often they end up being just sort of blank faces in my first drafts, but I do plan to have a physical description for them. I know roughly how old they are, and I just give really basic character traits. So they're sarcastic, might be overly sensitive, might love gossiping, might be, I don't know, a kleptomaniac. They could really like stealing. They could really love writing. So just those really basic character traits that I would know to bring up a few times to help make them distinctive. And then what are their fears? So what are they afraid of? Because obviously you're not going to want to be nice to these characters in your book. You're going to want to test them and worry them a bit. You want to have some tension there. So knowing what their fears are means you can bring those fears in. So if character Y is afraid of apples, an apple tree could fall on them. And so, yeah, making sure that sort of your plot relates to your characters as well. What are their goals? That's also important. What do they want? Character motivation. Again, that's going to be driving the plot. Do they actually achieve their goals? Do they not? So one time I saw a really mean thing to do is have a character die just before they achieve their goals, because that's a way of creating sympathy for these characters. So they could achieve them, they could not achieve those goals. But knowing what they are, that's important, I think. And then finally, their misbelief. And that, I think this is really helpful for character arc. Again, this is something my critique partner taught me, so I'm really thankful to have her. And I'm thankful to the passes on to all of you. So their misbelief, what is the one thing they believe about the world which is false? So what is the one thing they think is wrong that they learn about over the course of the novel? So if we take Peter Parker, he has no friends at the beginning of the novel and he thinks he's better off alone. Well, over the course of the novel, he learns that he needs other people. And in the climax, he's only able to achieve his goals with the help of all of his friends. And that's their character arc. That's how they change over the course of the book. And that is how you make sure that your character doesn't just stay static, which I think is also quite important when you're writing a book. So that is all sort of the backstory, the planning. So like I said, planning is very important for writing the 10,000 words in a day. But now we're on to the main bit. How do you actually write those 10,000 words? You've got everything on the page, you've done all the thinking and the research, and you're at the big moment actually writing the first draft. So like I said, block out a day that you have to dedicate to writing. Block out the distractions, sit in a quiet room, have your water and your snackies and everything all ready to write this 10,000 words. And you need to block out a lot of time. So I think the average that people write is about 1,000 words per hour. A lot of people might write faster, a lot of people might write slower, but I think 1,000 words an hour to be aiming for is good, in which case you would need at least 10 hours blocked out. But I like to take an hour for lunch as well. I like having a nice big break in the middle of the day. And then in terms of sort of how you actually write those 1,000 words, you could just keep going for an hour and seeing how much you come up with. But I like the method where you sprint for a certain amount of time and you take a nice break as well. So you're not just completely going. I like to think of it as it's not sprinting, it's running a marathon. So you're writing a lot of words very, very quickly. So it can feel a bit like a sprint, but I think it's just a marathon zoomed in. So you need to just plod along basically and just keep going and thinking, okay, 1,000 words, that's what I need to get to in an hour. That's what I'm going to do. I like to track what I'm going to do. So this is where the tracking comes in, knowing whether or not you're actually on schedule. And it's also it's also nice to be kind to yourself when you're writing these 10,000 words, because that's a big goal. And that's saying if you're going to, is it that you're aiming for the moon, you're going to hit the stars anyway. If you miss the moon, something like that. Even if you don't manage to get the 10,000 words down, you will still have written a good amount of words for your book. So I like to track what it is that I'm writing and how much I'm writing, and I like to use an Excel spreadsheet. I'm a scientist as well, so that sort of comes into why I come up with these sort of graphs and things. I think in graphs. You don't need to use Excel if you don't have Excel. You can literally just do this with a pen and paper. You don't need a fancy graph if you don't want a fancy graph. I just like the graph. I actually took this technique from NaNoWriMo just because that 1,660 words, I love the idea of thinking, okay, I'm on schedule to meet my target or I'm not. Just having a goal to aim for, I think that's really helpful. I think that's part of the reason lots of people do sort of NaNoWriMo in November for those 50,000 words. It's the same sort of idea here. So you can see here, time, I've started at 8 o'clock in the morning, nice and early. I have a goal of 1,000 words. And in that first session, I write 1,200 words. So I'm slightly ahead of schedule. And then the same process is throughout the day. I'm just continuing to plod along. Nice, and I would say the word is sedate. Just keep going, keep plodding, keep going. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You just need to keep going. It's those 26 miles that you're aiming for. You're not going to start off really, really fast and then burn out really quickly. You need to make sure you get to the end. So you can see there's that nice little plateau there. That is when I take my lunch. I have a nice hour break, but it's already baked into the day. It's already planned for there. So I'm not feeling guilty or anything for, having that nice big break in the middle of the day. And this is just very quickly, if you want to actually use Excel to set up your tracker and you don't know how to, like I said, you don't need to use Excel. But if you want to sort of have a fancy graph, it's very, very easy to do. So you would set it up like this. You'd fill out your time, your goals, and you'll be filling out your word count as you go, because obviously at 8 o'clock in the morning, you don't know how many words you'll have written at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So you fill that out in as you go. And what you do is you just highlight all this data and you go to insert, you go to the little graph button and you click on that little 2D graph there, and that will give you this lovely thing. And it will just keep populating as you go throughout the day and fill in this column here. So this is a bit of a controversial technique. I know some people won't like the idea of it or like the sound of it, but this is how I get through, because I do hit blocks. And these are sort of small blocks. These are bits where I just don't know how I'm going to sort of get out of this hole that I've come to. Because like I said, I plot things, but not into a huge amount of detail. So there will still be things I don't know about the book. And I think often, even if you plot really massively and really extensively, there are going to be new things that you don't know about. So sometimes I hit these and I don't know what I'm going to do, and I just need to keep going because I want to hit my 10,000 words. So I will literally put square brackets, write a note to myself, and come back to it later. Come back to it in draft 2, come back to it at the end of draft 1, whatever you want to call it. But the important thing is just getting the bulk of the book down and worrying about little bits here and there later. I don't like to do this too often because otherwise you're just going to end up with a 20,000 word book with those little square brackets everywhere. But, occasionally you will hit these blocks. Hopefully you wouldn't hit them too often because you obviously would have done your planning, but I think that's a good technique to do. And then obviously you can literally just do Control F to find those square brackets and come back to it later when you've got a bit more time. And also, hopefully, this would count towards your word count. So you can cheat slightly there and feel like you're still going. So yeah, that's a nice little perk as well. And then again, you need to have, I think, enthusiasm for what it is that you're writing. And sometimes you just don't have the enthusiasm for a particular scene or a particular part. Sometimes you just don't want to describe the character's emotions in too much detail. Sometimes you're like, okay, the character's sad, and you're like, you need to describe all these really big emotions. You need to describe them flinging themselves across the room and tears streaming down their face. But that is not what you're feeling at that particular moment in time. And honestly, if you're not feeling enthusiastic about it, but you know you're feeling enthusiastic about a later scene, just do the square brackets. Just keep going. Don't worry about it. It's a first draft. This is just for you. And that is also feeds into the part of, turning off your inner editor. So, your inner editor will be screaming at you, being like, you need to write this really dramatic fight scene and it needs to be amazing and spectacular. And you're just like, no, I need to really stop and think about this fight scene and need to think about everything that's going into it and thinking about all the actions and things like that. Yeah, just come back to it later. It'll be okay in draft 2 when you've got more time and you're stopping to properly think about it. Again, I think you can't edit a blank page. You can't make this fight scene better if you don't know that the fight scene's there. So that is everything I had planned to say. We will go on to questions and things.
Lovely, thank you so much. It's I am such a pantser, so all of this we did a little technical check, and all of it I was just like, this sounds like magic, because it's all like all this planning is so alien to me, but it sounds amazing. I'm going to start asking some questions. It's going to be a little bit of a mix between my questions and your guys, so I'll pick those up from the chat as well. But I always like to ask everybody that we have on, how did you start writing? How did you get into it?
I think I always enjoyed writing, sort of in school as well. Really enjoyed creative writing, joined little writing clubs and things. And I think I wrote, I don't know if we would call them books, but they were long. I think my first sort of book that I ever wrote, it was this sort of 120,000 words of just tome. And I just thought bigger is, just these giant books is better. I described, Blades of Grass. Maybe I was inspired by Tolkien. I don't know. But I don't really label that as a book, so to speak. And then I think I wrote my first sort of book in 2019, and it was this young adult fantasy, and it was sort of 90,000 words, and I was just like, okay, I've got this idea and I really want to write about it. And I entered into Write Mentor, which is this free mentoring program run by the incredible Stuart White, where sort of professionals are paired up with authors and they sort of mentor them. And I entered this book and I learned so much from my mentor. And I think that just gave me loads of tools. And at the end of it, I sort of had the 60,000 word children's book, because it turned out I'd written a children's book and it was disguised as a young adult. And then I tried querying that and didn't get sort of any real bites. Sort of got 4 requests, but there was something missing. But I was just so enthusiastic then about just taking everything I'd learned and writing a new book. And that was the one that then got me my agent. So yeah, it's been a journey there.
Lovely. And can I ask, sort of, like, you said that you queried one book and then you queried the next one. Did you have to query it very heavily? And sort of like, where are you at with your agent now? Can you tell us a bit about what you're up to?
Yeah, so my second book, I can't remember exactly how many queries I sent out, but I didn't actually sign with my now agent through cold querying, which I know is how the majority of people do sign with their agents, through just sending a query letter and getting a response. And that is, agents will say again and again, that is how the majority of people do sort of get their agents. I entered my book I pitched into a Twitter pitch event. So it was actually WM Pitch, which is run by Write Mentor. And I wasn't even going to enter into it. Funny enough, I was like, oh, no one will ever see this. I don't have a very big following. No one will like boost it or anything like that. And I was just, wondering what's the point. But I thought, why not? Nothing to lose. I entered that, and my agent then liked it. And then I think I spent a couple of days, maybe a week or so, sort of just polishing up the pages. sent it to her on a Wednesday, and I remember this specifically. She then came back on the Thursday, asking for a full request, and then on the Monday she had offered. So it happened sort of very, very quickly, but I sort of took my chance with that pitch event there, and I wouldn't have. So yeah, finding her was a bit of luck there, but I'm really glad that happened.
Like, personally though, I find that so encouraging, because I think we see these big pitch events and you see everyone's like amazing pitches and they're so polished, but then you don't hear the story of like, does anything actually come of that? Like, does anything happen? So that's really encouraging.
Yeah, I think I was really lucky there as well, because that particular agent knew what it was that my book needed to be edited. So I was getting a lot of sort of replies from other agents saying, it's too confusing, you need a bit more character emotions, and I just didn't really know what to do. But the agent that I signed with, she just had a very clear vision. And it was just a case of finding the right agent for my book, because a lot of other agents might have said no, whereas she was like, yes, I see how we can sort of improve this and edit this. So yeah, I think a lot of it is down to luck as well as just perseverance, just finding the right person for that particular book at that moment in time.
That's so lovely as well. Just the person that actually saw the, like, I guess the diamond in the rough, I guess, within it. They were like, actually, there's something that's here. But it needs a bit of work to kind of uncover it. That's really, really encouraging. I'm going to go on to some of the questions in the chat, because we're getting a few through. So there's one that's similar to a question I was thinking of asking anyway, that's like, what have you done? Basically, have you ever encountered a block that's too big that you couldn't overcome it? And I'm kind of linking this to a question that Tess asked as well. That's, have you ever experienced like burnout? And what have you kind of done to get yourself out of that? Or I think it's really hard when you're talking about burnout to talk about getting yourself out of it, because I think some of it's, you just have to wait it out and wait till you heal. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? I'm going to stop talking.
Oh, funny enough, I'm experiencing a block right now. So I've just started drafting a new book last week. I've been writing the 10,000 words a day, and things were flying, and I got to the midpoint, that dreaded midpoint, and then I was like, okay, everything that I plotted, it's all falling apart. This isn't where the story's supposed to go. And I sort of thought, okay, I've drafted a lot of words very, very quickly. Let me take a break. So sometimes it's just a case of stepping away for a couple of days, and also having that break be intentional. So not thinking, okay, I should be writing, I'm enjoying myself, but I should be writing. Just being like, okay, I've got this break, I'm not writing today. There is no reason to be too hard on myself or to feel bad about the fact that I'm not writing, because that break is intentional. So I always like to enjoy taking a break. And often as well, if I've got a big block and sort of taking a break and stepping back hasn't really worked, I will turn to my critique partners and I will say to them, okay, this is a story that I have, and things have come to a standstill, and I will just talk through the problem with them. They'll say to me, okay, what's the issue here? And just bouncing ideas off someone who isn't invested in the book, because at that point they wouldn't have read the book, and they've got more of an outsider's perspective. I think that's often really helpful, because often I'll be trying to come up with this really complicated solution when actually things are a lot more simple, and they'll be like, okay, why doesn't the character just do this? And I'm like, oh, how did I not think of that myself? It's so straightforward. But I think, yeah, just taking the breaks there and then just speaking to people as well. I think, yeah, often you're very solitary as a writer, sort of typing away alone in your room. But I think, yeah, bouncing ideas off other people as well. I think that's always quite useful to do.
I think that's a really great endorsement of having a break, because I think I know that I particularly sometimes feel really guilty for taking a break, and actually taking a planned break is very different, isn't it? Because there's no like, oh, I should be doing anything. So that's really great. There's a couple of questions that have just come in that kind of, I guess, link to that in a way. But basically, how many books do you write in a year? Aaron asked. And kind of linking to that, do you set monthly goals? Liz asked that as well.
But it depends, obviously, because I only restarted writing seriously in 2019. But if I take sort of 2021 and think about what I've written this year. So I started drafting a new sort of fantasy book in January, wrote 33,000 words of that, and then I paused that to focus on writing a different book, a different children's fantasy, because that was the one I wanted to write more. So I wrote that one. And then I'd written a thriller last year. So I then went and edited it this year. So I spent quite a bit of time doing that. And now I've sent those edits off to my agent for her to take a look at. And I'm now drafting a new book. So I like sort of jumping around sort of projects. So it's hard to actually say how much I'm drafting in a year versus how much I'm editing, just because there's a mix. I will draft something and then I'll have a book that I've previously drafted and I'll need to edit that one. So there's no sort of target or anything like that on a monthly basis in terms of sort of setting word counts. I will say to myself, okay, I want my edits to take 2 months, for example. And often, you know, that I'm being way too ambitious and way too hard on myself. So I will sort of give myself some leeway, and I will again start wording to my critique partners and being like, I'm never going to hit my goal. And they're like, well, why have you set that goal? Why have you said you're going to draft an entire book in like a month? No one is expecting anything from you, you know, to be that fast. So yeah, I think setting goals and things are nice to have, but also give yourself a leeway, you know, be kind to yourself as well.
Great. Yeah, lovely answer. You keep mentioning critique partners, and I'm aware that we might have like newer writers here. So what are critique partners? What do they mean to you? And how did you go about sort of meeting with them and connecting with them?
Yeah, so critique partners and beta readers, I spent a long time trying to work out exactly what they were and what the difference was between them, because people throw the terms around sort of wildly, and I have been as well. So to me, a critique partner is someone who sort of reads earlier drafts, someone you bounce ideas off as well. They're typically another writer, so they're looking more for the mechanics of the story and thinking, okay, you need to have a character goal. These characters need to have motivations.
Ravena, we've lost you a little bit there. Sorry, everybody. I'm going to try and get her back.
I was kicked out.
There we go. I thought it might help if I kicked you out. And sorry, we lost you. You just sort of started talking about critique partners and said they're typically other writers, and then we kind of lost you.
Yeah,
sorry.
My internet is not great. So critique partners, typically other writers, and they will look for more technical issues in your book. They will be able to sort of help you bounce ideas off and sort of be with you from earlier drafts as well. So they might read an earlier draft. You will typically often read their work as well. So there's a nice like exchange there as well, which I think is quite useful as well. Just looking for problems in someone else's work. It helps you identify issues in your own work as well. And then beta readers, the terms are often used interchangeably, but to me, a beta reader might not necessarily be a writer. They might just be someone who enjoys reading, and they will sort of look at your book as a whole and sort of say, okay, I don't really like that character, or I'm a bit bored here, but not sort of go into too much sort of technical detail. They're reading as a reader, whereas a critique writer will be reading as a writer. So saying, okay, you need a character goal. Your character, their life is meaningless. They have no goals. So how I find them. So one of my critique partners, I just found through Twitter. I just literally tweeted one day, I'm looking for a critique partner for my book. is anyone interested in reading? And my critique partner replied, and I've known her, I think, since 2019 or something. So really successful. And then my other critique partner I met through Write Mentor, which is the mentoring program I mentioned earlier. But I think things like Pitch Wars and Write Mentor, where you apply and you might be matched with a mentor, those are really good opportunities as well to find critique partners, people who are serious about writing, or typically people who are looking to improve themselves through those sorts of programs. So those are often a really great way to sort of find like-minded people who write in your genre as well. Beta readers, I found them, all over the place. Twitter, just Discord chats. So yeah, they're a bit sort of trickier because they might not necessarily be the same readers every single time. I wouldn't suggest having your friends be your beta readers, just because they might be too nice. They might not want to point out any issues. So you want someone who is not afraid to do that. But that being said, I like my friends to read my books in later drafts and tell me how amazing I am, because writing, there is a lot of rejection and it is hard. It's very, very hard to do. And there are a lot of people saying no, and it could just be quite difficult. And sometimes you're just, or at least for me, I'm just like, why am I doing this? What am I writing? Nothing I'm doing is good. And that is when you turn to your friend and you're like, then read my book and tell me I'm amazing. And they come and tell you that you're amazing, and you're like, I am. Because I think you get wrapped up in sort of the publishing world where everyone's writing drafts and everyone's sort of plotting and writing 1,000 words a day, and you forget that it's such a big achievement just sitting down and writing a book. And that is when it's really, really helpful just to have people who aren't in the industry to be like, okay, you're incredible. So yeah, that is one of my top tips. Have some cheerleaders as well.
Definitely. I always get my mum to read my books because she is such a cheerleader. Like, I'm not sure she's ever given me any advice or any critique, but she's absolutely like, this is the best thing ever. And I'm like, yeah, it is. Thank you. So helpful to have those people in your life. A question from Emily was, do you find using this like big block of time, like doing it all in one day, more effective than several like shorter kind of like sections of writing? And I guess that kind of links to something I was sort of thinking about, is like, how did you develop the system? Because I'm guessing that originally you did what everyone does and tries and fits it in around work, and so how did you get to this point of like, yep, I'm going to go do a whopping great day of writing?
Yep. So I think when I first started, I was doing this I Googled it and I was like, how do you write a book? How do you get 60,000 words? And a lot of devices write 1,000 words and just do it every day. And I tried doing that, but there are days when I just didn't want to write. So I was like, why is this not working for me? This is such typical advice. And I think I sat down and I thought about it and I was like, okay, I need to think about me as my personality. I'm writing 1,000 words, but it's not feeling like I'm making sort of huge amounts of progress. And often I'll be coming home from work and I'm just so tired and I just don't want to do it. And I'm not feeling like I'm getting stuck in with 1,000 words. Whereas I think other people are able to just do 20 minutes here and there and get really stuck in. And it doesn't work for me. So I think personality wise, the 10,000 word system, or just writing drafts fast, it might not always be 10,000 words. It might be 2,000 words. It might be 5,000 words. It's not always 10,000 words. But the idea is that I'm having these big blocks of times where I'm sitting down and I'm just focusing on writing. And I think personality wise for me, I like feeling like I'm making progress. So I don't like going really slowly. I don't like spending too long planning. I like feeling like I'm moving forwards, which is why I end up writing drafts very, very quickly, but then doing loads and loads of drafts afterwards. So I'll end up doing, 6, 7, 8 drafts before, I'm happy with the final product. And those drafts might be incrementally different, but I like just the idea that I'm making progress. So I think personality wise, it just works more for me doing this way, which is why, it doesn't work. It might not work for everyone. So yeah, everyone's unique, but I think just for me personally, it does work.
Mm. And Jackie was just agreeing with you that to like be with the characters properly, she needs to like write more. So yeah, having the space in between is great to mull everything over, but then having like a big chunk of writing is really helpful. So it's really cool. It's lovely learning about sort of different ways people do it. I love learning. One thing that I was curious about, and someone else was curious about as well, Laura, was how long does your editing take? So how do you get yourself from this, in some ways it sounds slightly messy, first draft to something that is polished and like ready to send to your agent, ready for a friend to read so that you get that boost? How do you get from the here to there?
So the first thing I typically do is take a break after writing the first draft and trying to get some time away, because obviously the idea is you come back and you're looking with the fresh eyes. I typically am not able to stay away very long, just because I just want to get stuck in, and I'm just like, okay, I remember all these problems and things and I just want to fix. So then often my critique partners will have to sort of rein me in a bit and be like, no, wait. But I will come back, and the first thing I would do is do a control F for those little square brackets that I've, past Ravena has left for herself all over this book, and I will fill them out. And those take more time, and they might require more thinking. And I'm not sort of doing big word counts. The goal there isn't, to hit 3,000 words, it's to remove all the square brackets. So the goals change slightly. It's not about word counts, it's about a different measure of progress. So that's typically my second draft. I will do that, and I will just go through and just add in, the world, character descriptions, background details. I will, read for plot holes. I typically like to do plot first, character, and then setting, just because if the plot is going to change, there's no point having these wonderful descriptions of characters if, that character is going to disappear in draft 5. So I do plots first, and then, like I said, it just goes incrementally. Plot, character, setting, and building up and adding in all the layers and all the details. And at that point, it's nowhere near like a polished final version, but I will have done as much as I can. I will think it's polished and amazing, and I will think to myself, there is nothing more that I can do, and I will send it off to a critique partner, and the critique partner will come back and we would be like, well, actually, there's X, Y, Z. And I'll be like, oh, now that you're mentioning it, there are some issues here. And again, I think that's really useful. That is the reason why critique partners are so useful. They will see things that you just don't, and they will have ideas that you don't. So I will have a critique partner read sort of an early version, and after they've read it and I've sort of made their sort of edits, it will be tough initially to get the letter and be like, okay, oh no, there is so much that I need to fix. But again, it's a case of, like I said, with the planning stage as well, not thinking of it as, oh, I have to edit this whole book, thinking, okay, I need to fix this character, I need to do this, I need to that, thinking about it in smaller chunks. And I like to edit chapter by chapter. I can't sort of jump around. And I know some people will, edit the climax and then jump back to the beginning. I can't do that. I have to go logically through. But edits will take a lot longer than the first draft. And then for me, that is where the majority of the work comes in, is doing those edits.
Nice. I'm really aware that we're almost at the 8 o'clock mark, so I'm going to quick fire some questions at you, if that's okay. So someone read that, I think this is Emily, that the protagonist should always be a person, not like a big company or a volcano that represents or causes the issues. What are your thoughts about that?
I think, yeah, having a volcano as a protagonist, if we take that as an example, they might become sort of like a person, and they might sort of, I don't know, become active, stand on their feet and stomp around a bit. But I think the idea is the reader wants something that they can relate to. So that might be a person, or it might be, for example, an animal, or it might be sort of a walking sort of fork, or in Toy Story, for example, it's toys. But the idea is that there is something that you can follow through and get to know. So I think with something like a company, it might be a lot more difficult to have a personal connection with a company versus with a person. So I would definitely say you need to have something that I really can relate to and want to follow through from page one.
Mm. The thing I would say as well, with my like editor hat on, is that particularly with children's writing, having a person who is the bad guy is much easier for them to sort of understand and, like you say, connect with. And so having like a volcano or a thing that is the bad person is just slightly harder to write, particularly for children, and I'd say for adults as well. It's just more of a challenge. So I don't think you can't do it, and I basically don't think there's any rules in writing, and you can kind of do if you do it well, you can break any rule, but kind of, yeah, just think carefully about how you want to do it and who you're writing for, because to begin with, you are writing for yourself, but actually there is a point where you then begin writing for the reader. So it's just worth thinking about. Another quick one, do you have any tips for getting in the right mood for those certain scenes that you've like skipped over?
I think lots of whining, just lots of complaining to people, but also not rushing. I think going away, having a think, maybe talking to someone. So I would talk to my critique partner saying there is a scene that I really don't want to write, and they'll be like, why? You know, what about the scene that is it that you're not thinking you're going to enjoy? Is there a particular sort of plot issue, or is there a character who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing? And then just having that chat and just talking through, and then armed with that knowledge, I think it's easier to just then, you have to sometimes just force yourself to sit down and just write something. And it doesn't need to be great. Again, sometimes it's a case of just get the words on the page, and you can edit later, but you can't edit a blank page. So it's sort of a mixture of going away, having a think, and sometimes just forcing it as well.
Yeah, I think that sometimes, because I'm such a pantser, I just write it as it goes. But there are points when I'm writing a scene and I think, oh, this is awful. Like, what is going on here? But I just keep telling myself, like, it's okay. I'll come back and make it better. That's all right. And then I'll get
problem,
yeah. And that's, yeah, future me can deal with that. And then you get back to a scene where you think, oh, I like this scene now. This is a good one. So yeah, it's kind of, sometimes you just have to grin and bear it, I guess. How many of these 10K days do you do in a row? And like how big is the gaps between them, I guess?
Right, so my last book, it was a thriller, and I was doing 10K sessions at the weekends. So I did Saturday and Sunday, and then during the week, maybe I'd write, a few thousand words here and there, or I might find a nice big chunk of time, maybe write 2,000 words or so. But I was doing sort of the bulk of the writing on the weekends and having a break between them. For my current book that I've been drafting, I've been doing sort of 10,000 words every day, and I found that that's been, too much. I need to have just a break. So I think with the 10,000 words, there is a chance that you might get yourself a bit burnt out. You might stop enjoying what you're writing just because you're going so quickly. So I would say, weekends maybe, or just one particular day, maybe once a week or so, that might be great. But if you can, everyone's different. Some people might be able to do 10,000 words and just draft a book in a week. And I know some famous writers have done that. Agatha Christie is one. She used to write her drafts very, very quickly. So yeah, everyone's different there, I think.
I guess it's just, like you said, working with your personality and kind of what you're
capable of.
Yeah. And I feel like writing breeds more writing, but there is a sense of like recharging and sort of letting the story sit even in a first draft and like kind of figuring out the way. So yeah. One final question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, because I don't know if you've written any introverted characters. So someone was asking about any tips for writing introverts.
I have actually. in my last thriller, the character was very introverted, and there she had a lot of internal dialogue. There is a lot, obviously, when I'm an introverted person, there is a lot going on inside a lot of the time. So she had a lot of internal dialogue. And some of it was really snarky, and really, sarcastic and fun, but she didn't say a lot of that out loud. She would say, maybe one or two things. And I found that quite fun, because the reader gets to see, the internal workings of this character, and what are they like on the inside versus how do they present themselves to the outside world. So yeah, lots of internal dialogue, I would say, really helps, I think, with an introverted character.
I like that as well. It almost feels like the reader's in on a secret.
Yeah.
Because there's like what's being presented to the other characters and what they know, and it's kind of like it's almost like a little friendship, isn't it, that kind of only they know about. Very nice. Well, thank you, Ravena. That, like, such a great session, so much to take away. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
You're welcome, and thank you everyone for coming on and listening.
It was great. So our next How I session is being led by Jules Mariner. She's a fellow Islander, so I have met her in real life. It's very exciting. She'll be speaking about how she self-publishes her novels. And she is one, if you are thinking of self-publishing, if you're interested in it, if you're already doing it, she's one that is great. She has self-published so many stories, and she illustrates them herself as well. She's done picture books through to chapter books, and they are all brilliant. She's so good, and she will have so much wisdom to share. If you're interested in signing up for that, you can pop over to my website. It's annabritton.co.uk, and you can nab a space on that now. But we're going to finish there. I really hope this session has been helpful to you. I hope that you're all going to block out a day now and we're going to hear about these crazy writing sessions you've been having. But thank you so much again, Ravena, and we hope that you guys all have a lovely evening.